Hello students, welcome to Learning Factor. I am Rashmi, your chemistry teacher. Today we are learning about types of chemical reaction of class 10. So in this chapter we have to learn about 5 types of chemical reactions. So there are so many chemical reactions we can see around us. That is rusting of iron, setting of milk into curd, respiration, digestion of food. These are all chemical reactions. That is transformation of a chemical substance into another substance, we call it as chemical reactions. So let us see one by one. So 5 types of chemical reactions. First one is combination reaction. Second one is decomposition reaction. Third one is displacement reaction. Fourth is double displacement reaction. And fifth one is oxidation reduction. Let us see one by one. First one is combination reaction. Combination reaction. Combination, from the name it suggests, that is two or more reactants combine to form a single product. That is, two or more reactants may combine to form a single product. In generally, we can represent this combination reaction as A plus B giving AB. A and B are the reactants and AB is a single product formed here. So, let us see its example. That is, one example is burning of magnesium in air. Magnesium burns in air with a dazzling white fumes, dazzling white flame, and changes to white powder. This equation we can represent it as Mg plus O2 giving MgO. Magnesium is a ribbon, is solid, oxygen is gas, and the product formed is magnesium oxide. And magnesium oxide is a white powder. So here there are two reactants, magnesium and oxygen, and they are combining to form a single product. So this is one example. Second example is quicklime. When it is mixed in water, it reacts vigorously to form calcium hydroxide. And also a large amount of heat is released during this reaction. So calcium oxide we call it as quicklime. When quicklime is mixed with water, it reacts vigorously in water, and the product is calcium hydroxide plus heat. So here also there are two reactants, calcium oxide and water are the reactants, and we are getting a single product. Plus heat we are getting. Since heat is evolved in this reaction, this is an exothermic reaction. Reactions in which heat energy is released in large amounts, we call it as exothermic reaction. So this reaction is an example of exothermic reaction also. And this one here, two reactants combine to form a single product. So it is an example of combination reaction also. So this is about combination reaction, where two or more reactants combine to form a single product. Okay. Now, next reaction is our decomposition reaction. Decomposition reaction are the reactions in which one compound decomposes into two or more compounds. One compound decomposes into two or more compounds. So this reaction, decomposition reaction, is actually an opposite of our combination reaction. That is reaction in which one compound we can write it as, in generally we can write it as AB. Reaction in which one compound decomposes into two or more compounds or elements are known as decomposition reaction. So generally we can write it as AB giving A plus B. So this is reverse of this, our combination reaction just discussed above. It is just opposite of the combination reaction. So one example for combination decomposition reaction is heating of calcium carbonate. If we heat, example, heating of calcium carbonate. If we heat calcium carbonate, the products obtained are calcium oxide plus CO2 gas. This is solid and this is also solid. So when we heat calcium carbonate, we get two products. Here, decomposition reaction, as I said it now, is a reaction in which one compound decomposes to give two or more compounds. So here calcium carbonate, when it is heated, we get two compounds, that is calcium oxide, which is quicklime, plus carbon dioxide gas. So this is an example of decomposition reaction. There are of three types. So in this decomposition reaction, calcium carbonate is heated and it decomposes to calcium oxide and water. So here this is called as thermal decomposition reaction. So this is an example of thermal decomposition reaction, where is calcium carbonate, when you heat it, we get calcium oxide plus CO2. There is second type of decomposition reaction in which we can pass electricity. Electricity is passed, and such type of decomposition reaction we call it as electrolytic decomposition. Electrolytic decomposition. So here reaction in which compounds decompose into simpler compounds by passing of electricity. So example is water. When electricity is passed through it, which is liquid L. If we pass electricity through it, it decomposes into simpler compounds, that is hydrogen gas and oxygen gas. To H2 plus O2. So this is an example of electrolytic decomposition. So moving to the third type of decomposition reaction is photolytic decomposition. Photolytic decomposition reaction takes place in presence of sunlight. That is, white silver chloride turns gray in sunlight. Silver chloride is AgCl, and it, in presence of sunlight, it turns to gray. This AgCl is white, it turns to gray silver plus Cl2 gas. So there are three types of thermal decomposition reaction. Three types of decomposition reaction. One is thermal decomposition reaction, electrolytic decomposition, and third is photolytic decomposition. So these are about decomposition reaction. In the first decomposition reaction, we can see heat energy is absorbed, and the reaction in which heat energy is absorbed, we call it as endothermic reaction. This is an example of endothermic reaction. That is, reactions in which heat energy is absorbed is called endothermic reactions. So decomposition reaction, always heat energy is required either in the form of heat, electricity or sunlight. So these are all endothermic reactions. Next, moving into our third reaction, which is our displacement reaction. Displacement reaction. That is, in this reaction, a more reactive metal displaces a less reactive metal or element. Chemical reactions in which a more reactive element can replace a less reactive element to form a compound. And its example is zinc. When zinc is put in copper sulfate solution is blue in color. And when zinc is put in copper sulfate solution, when zinc reacts with copper sulfate solution, it forms zinc sulfate plus copper. So here zinc displaces copper from its solution because zinc is more reactive than copper. So zinc can displace copper from its solution. And here the blue color fades gradually. The blue color of copper sulfate fades gradually. This is an example of displacement reaction. One more example is there, that is iron. Zinc is solid. Iron plus, again copper sulfate solution. This is aqueous solution. Gives here iron, which is more reactive than copper sulfate. It displaces copper from its solution and becomes FeSO4. Here also iron, which is more reactive than copper, displaces copper from its solution to form iron sulfate plus copper. Here zinc and iron are more reactive than copper, so they displace copper from its compound. Now moving to our next reaction is double displacement reaction. Double displacement reaction. What happens in double displacement reaction is that in this reaction, ions are exchanged between the reactants, two reactants, forming new compounds. That is, for example, in barium chloride solution, if you take barium chloride solution and add sodium sulfate solution into it, then we get an insoluble white substance. That we call it as insoluble substance which is obtained. An insoluble white substance is obtained. We call this white substance, which is insoluble in the solution, call it as precipitate. And such type of reactions in which a precipitate is formed is called precipitation reactions. So in this reaction, barium sulfate, a white precipitate is formed. Plus 2 NaCl, which will be in the solution. This is solid. So this will be insoluble in the solution. So it is called as precipitate. And such type of reactions in which a precipitate is formed is called precipitation reaction. So this is an example of precipitation reaction. So barium chloride solution, when is added to sodium sulfate, we get a white precipitate of barium sulfate plus NaCl. Here ions are exchanged. Which ions are exchanged here? Here barium and sulfate ion. Here Ba2 plus ion from this solution and the sulfate ion from the other reactant. From this barium chloride, Ba2 plus ion, and from the other reactant, sodium sulfate, the sulfate ions. These two react together, 2 minus ion. Ba2 plus and 2 minus SO4 2 minus ion combine to form this barium sulfate. This white precipitate is formed by the reaction of sulfate and Ba2 plus ions. Other product, that is NaCl, formed here remains in the solution. So the double displacement is about the exchange of ions. So in barium chloride is one reactant and sodium sulfate is another reactant. And the ions are exchanged between these two reactants. That is barium, from barium chloride, Ba2 plus ion, and from Na2SO4, the SO4 2 minus ion. These two ions combine to form our white precipitate. So this is about double displacement reaction. So moving to our last chemical reaction, that is oxidation and reduction. Last one is our oxidation reduction reaction. Fifth one is oxidation reduction oxidation reduction. What do you mean by oxidation reaction? If a substance gains oxygen during a reaction, we call it as oxidation reaction. And if a substance loses oxygen during a reaction, we call it as reduction reaction. So let's see an example and understand better what is an oxidation reaction and a reduction reaction. In oxidation reaction, the substance gains oxygen. So let's take copper powder. Copper powder and heat it in presence of oxygen. We are heating copper oxide in presence of oxygen. We get copper oxide, which is black in color. Copper is brown in color, and when it is heated in presence of oxygen, we get black copper oxide. So in this reaction, we can see copper gains one oxygen. So here copper undergoes oxidation reaction. And for reduction reaction, the same copper oxide, if we pass hydrogen gas to this copper oxide formed here and heat it, we will get copper plus H2O. So in reduction reaction, we can see here this copper oxide loses oxygen and forms copper. And we can see here in this reaction, hydrogen gains oxygen. So in this reaction, not only reduction is taking place, but oxidation is also taking place in this reaction. Here hydrogen is gaining an oxygen. So hydrogen undergoes oxidation reaction, and here copper undergoes reduction reaction. So in this reaction, both oxidation and reduction both are taking place. So in such reactions in which both oxidation and reduction are taking place, we call it as redox reaction. It is named as redox reaction. So if a substance gains oxygen, here hydrogen is gaining oxygen, so it undergoes oxidation reaction, and copper oxide loses oxygen during this reaction, and in the same reaction both oxidation and reduction are taking place. We call such reaction as redox reaction. So far we have discussed different types of chemical reactions. 5 types of chemical reactions we have discussed today. So thank you for watching. Bye.